your statements.
Thank you. I'll try to make it short. I agree with Kathleen. It's much more interesting actually to answer questions and have comments. Let me add just a couple of things to what Kathleen had to say, because I really do agree with the basic premise of her book that the use of fossil fuels, particularly oil and gas most recently, has done great things for the world. And what concerns me, though, is that the public has now taken that for granted. That it seems so much a part of our daily life to go fill up at the gas station or turn on the natural gas in our home or turn on the electricity, that it seems like we can make a lot of these drastic changes without changing that. And but the public is scared right now. It's very clear. It's not just the government that's doing the problem. They're scared. They're scared of international trade. They're scared of free markets, frankly. They're scared of climate change, real or not. And they're scared of technology. We see a lot of people being scared about fracking. And my concern is we've got to do something about those public fears. And I'm concerned that government cannot be the answer to that. That we have to see a world in which government does what it's supposed to do, which is to protect its citizens. But a lot of these decisions about energy policy and about free trade, those need to be made in the marketplace. And those need to be made not by governments, but by individual companies. Kathleen's right, the shale revolution occurred by entrepreneurs because of, we had a very vibrant oil and gas industry already here in Texas, and we had private ownership of land, particularly mineral rights, that is not shared in the rest of the world. Some people actually believe Texas messed up when they allowed that to happen, when we formed ourselves as a union, formed ourselves as a state. So I'm concerned about government. I'm running for railroad commissioner, as is Wayne, and I'm concerned that any government interference in the marketplace will be detrimental to doing what I think needs to be done, which is a much freer market in energy. So I don't believe the Railroad Commission, for example, ought to be champions of oil and gas. They ought to be the regulator of oil and gas, not its champions. They shouldn't be the champions of wind or solar. That is not the business of government. So I'm running on a platform of transforming our regulation of our energy industries into doing, very simply, protecting property rights, protecting our freedoms, and protecting our common resources, and nothing more than that. That is inappropriate for government to be doing any more than that. Thank you.
Any questions for Mark? No. Oh, there's one back there. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Miller, does Texas even need a railroad commission? I mean, even if you renamed it Oil and Gas Commission, is it even something that's necessary? I mean, wasn't OPEC originally based on the formation when they formed OPEC in the late 50s? Wasn't it based on the idea that we need to keep prices of oil at a high rate?
They did manipulate the marketplace, even though they touted themselves as being free market folks, and they really weren't. Whether we need a railroad commission is a really interesting question, particularly for us libertarians, which generally want less government. But I believe there is a role, because there's some very legitimate property rights issues that are really resolved by the Railroad Commission. They serve a very fundamental quasi-judicial role, particularly in disputes between drainage across boundaries, sharing common resources. So there are some very legitimate conflicts of freedoms, conflicts of rights that we libertarians don't often want to talk about. But I think something like the Railroad Commission has a very good role in doing that. It's unfortunate that our courts are not in a position to do that. But if I have a dispute with ExxonMobil, I'm actually probably more likely to get some recourse at the Railroad Commission than I am in district court. So that's one of the reasons I think there is a legitimate role, although there's lots of things I would do to transform the Railroad Commission to change its role to be something much more fundamental than what it's doing today.
Well, I'm a member of the Lamestream media. I'm a reporter at the Texas Tribune. I have one question kind of for each person on the panel. You don't all need to answer now, but I can re-ask it. But Ms. Hartnett-White, your presentation, included, comments about climate science and how you believe that, things, climate change is not a solved, climate science is not solved, that you're basically skeptical of it. And I'm just wondering, I guess Mark first, since you're up, could you comment on the fact that most major oil and gas producers that I'm aware of have actually come out and said explicitly that they believe that human-made or human activity is warming the earth, and that we should do something about it, including ExxonMobil, who have been filing their kind of interesting dispute, which includes free speech issues and so forth. But ExxonMobil explicitly on its website right now says, I could actually quote it. It says, the risk of climate change is clear, and the risk warrants action. Increasing carbon emissions in the atmosphere are having a warming effect. So I'm just kind of wondering where you stand on climate science, particularly in that regard.
Yeah, unfortunately, the question usually gets asked as a single question, and in my view, there's at least 4 questions. One of them is the Earth warming? And I think it's relatively clear the Earth has in fact been warming for about 150 or 200 years. The second question, of course, is it predominantly human activity or not? And that's where some of the climate modeling comes in. Unfortunately, I spent a large part of my career doing computer modeling, which means I know some of the pitfalls of computer models. And it's often said they're often wrong, but often useful. And so this may be one of the cases where they're actually particularly may be wrong. I believe there's probably some, we know carbon dioxide is in fact a greenhouse gas. So if I were to guess, just based on my scientific background, I'd say there's some. How much it is, that part is debatable. That is very much debatable. And it has to do with the particular parameters you use in the model and so on and so forth. But the third question is, should we try to mitigate it? And the answer to that, first of all, can we even mitigate it? I believe probably not, because I think the Russians and the Chinese are probably never going to come on board, or the Indians, with anything that we might do. And the question is, then should we? And I find it very compelling that we probably ought to prepare to deal with climate change if it's going to happen, and pay for it with dollars that will be much richer 60 or 80 or 100 years from now than we are today, and actually better able to afford if we don't kill the economy as we know it today. So my perspective is that there's very little we should probably even do about it, even though we believe there might be some warming going to occur.
Kathleen, you want to comment on that?
Well, I'd rather give the candidates
Okay. We'll
more
let,
opportunity.
any more questions for Mark? We can ask
We
him.
should have them all 3 speak, and then we'll ask questions to them all.
We'll ask questions after.
Do we speak to that, or whatever?
No, that's all right. If there aren't any other questions for Mark, I'm going to go ahead and let Wayne make his statement, and then we can open it up for questions for all.
It's neat to be at a meeting where at least us on the stage all agree. There is a place in society for clean, reliable, safe energy, and that is exactly what that the free market economy has done. I agree with Mark that the idea is, I've always been what's called a conservative. What's conservative? I think it was best represented by former economist Bob McEwen, who was a congressman, that always said that the smaller the government, the richer the nation, the larger the government, the poorer the nation. So the less government does, the better the free market economy does things. And in 14 years in the legislature, I find that every time that the government tried to fix a problem, it was more costly, took more time, took more effort, and usually screwed up the problem more than if you watched over the bad actors, which I think that's what the government should be doing, is watching over to make sure that we're protected, that we do science-based, consistent, predictable, science-based decisions. And with those, we then take the bad actors. And most of the time when the bad actors are identified, you then assign that to the free market. And they will see that it gets corrected much faster than government does, much cheaper than government does. But I do believe, as Mark does, that the Railroad Commission is that quasi-judicial body that makes sure that those in the energy industry keep things safe and right for the public. But the idea of the direction of energy in America is absolutely unbelievable. We need cheap, plentiful, reliable energy. And what you find out when you look at the last few years on the environmental sequence of what's happening is that actually the industry has done more to clean up the environment than any other thing in history. There's two views. One view is, are we here to worship Mother Earth, and is anything mankind does to affect Mother Earth incorrect? Or is our duty to make sure that mankind is protected and our children and grandchildren enjoy an earth that provides for them the best, healthiest environment for the future? That's totally two different views, and I believe you referred to that when you mentioned the one that wanted euthanasia to kill people who are trying to produce oil and gas. Prince Philip, by the way, who was the chairman of the International Organization on Environmental Control, he said he hoped he would come back in a second life as a virus so he could kill as many of humans to decrease the amount of population on Earth that was threatening the environment. Now understand, it's better to kill people than to improve the environment. We have a cleaner environment today than we did. The temperature, they kept saying, here's what's unreal, and I'll get in my comments. In 1900, 85% of the people in the United States of America were in agriculture. Why? Because at that time, they had to get up from daylight till dark and make food, clothing, and shelter for their families. Something weird happened as they invented a steam engine over in England. And all of a sudden, the steam engine started coming over there, and all of a sudden, they started developing the lack of need for animals and people to do the work. It came to the United States. The average lifespan was 25 to 35 years back then. Today, 1.5% of the population of the United States of America is in agriculture. And we have an overabundance of production of food. Folks, we have lived through a remarkable advance. By the way, the average age now is 75. So what has happened is because of the development of fossil fuels, because of the use of fossil fuels, we have a cleaner environment than we did 30, 40 years ago. We have a longer lifespan than we did 100 years ago. And that every single one of the predictions from 1977, when President Carter predicted that we'd be out of oil and gas in the next 15 years, we now have more oil and gas. President Barack Obama has called for the end of the treachery of communism as we did. Now we need to have the treachery of oil stopped in America. That we would be out of oil and gas in the next few years. Because of the shale play, I just got back to British Petroleum, comes with an international report each year. And down in Houston, they invited me to attend. It's remarkable, this guy from England for the entire world was reporting that the shale play in the United States, which, by the way, basically I tell folks it's because they told us that we were going to run out of oil and gas. And in Texas, we said, well, we were going straight down. Well, look, let's do it sideways and see what happens. And literally it changed the entire world. We now have, and in your book, you reveal over 500 years of proven reserves now in both oil, gas, and coal in the United States. It is absolutely unbelievable. And here's the fear. About the time that we're providing all this, in the past 10 years, past 7.5 years that Barack Obama has been president, we've had to be anemic as a financial person. We had an anemic growth that he always brags about of 2% a year. Had it not been for the oil, gas, coal business in the state of Texas, that would be a negative number. Understand, oil, gas, coal in the state of Texas is 30%, 1/3 of your retail economy is either directly or indirectly oil, gas, and coal. In your government, it's almost 20% of what's there. People in Texas that say, I'm not in the oil and gas business, if you live in Texas, you're in the oil and gas business. And so I believe that, yes, we need to, as government, protect and defend, and I agree, and then allow the free market to operate as much as it possibly can. It has proven to outdo government every time. It has proven to produce a cleaner world than we had prior.
Questions? anyone on the panel?
This kind of open question to all of you. My lifetime's been interesting because I watched the insanity of government grow since I got out of high school. And in the mid-60s, we came up with this idea that bureaucrats have the answer for what, I don't know, but they've been really hard at it. And we've watched since the mid-60s our whole economy be changed by government intervention, not only in the oil and gas industry and everything else. And horribly, what's worse, monetary policy has destroyed this nation, and this attack on what makes America great, which is energy. You know, energy is the slave of man. You talk about 1% grow all the food. Well, that's a fallacy. It's the energy of the machinery they have that creates all of that food. And energy's the key. If you take away energy from man, burn wood, that's an absolutely insanity. We're going to revert back to the Stone Age. It's illogical, but here's the problem. Again, government is financing insanity that we have to pay for. You know, windmills, I mean, come on, windmills is nuts. Solar energy is a hazard of tomorrow that is impossible to measure. So there is no future except hydrocarbon, and maybe, which we destroyed in the 70s, nuclear power would give us an energy source. But yet, you've got the government educating our children in lies. So we've got a whole society of people that are so ignorant in understanding energy, you people can't talk to them. You don't have the words. You can't speak their language. So how do we do? How do we get people to go to the polls to vote out this insanity that we're in, that's a quagmire that's flushing us down the toilet? No, there's the secret. How can you reach people to understand? We can sit here and listen to what you say, but we're what? 0.00. We have less people that understand energy in this nation than claim they're homosexuals. So stop and think about that. How do you change the policy in this nation that's open?
Anybody want to comment? on
Yeah,
this statement?
there's several things. Number one, you get them to buy this book. You start clearly, you get the truth out there, and you start telling people. I was with the oil company day before yesterday up in Dallas, and they've agreed to purchase the book and provide to all of their employees in the business to get the word out of what's going on and this truth. Because what's happened is even our oil and gas companies have been defensive to the clean, green energy folks for decades now, and we have allowed the lies to get out there. You're exactly right. And what you've got to understand, even about the economy that I was talking about, that we save the nation, people have got to understand that if we allow the greenies to keep doing what they're doing, which is an absolute lie, none of their theories in the last 35 years have proven true. Literally none. Give me one. I guarantee press. Give me one theory of the past 35 years from the greenies that has proven true. They're all false. Didn't do it. Didn't get hot. Didn't use up all our oil and gas. Didn't drain up all the water. It's cleaner. We're breathing. We're living longer. Everything's working good. Here's a scary article that came out just yesterday in the Houston Chronicle. It's talking about